Hi everyone, welcome to Last Book Alive. I am with my guest Omar Khurshid, who's my cousin, and based in the US on the West Coast. And today we're reading Western Lane. Um, Omar, hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi,
Um,
how are you?
and could you introduce
Hi,
yourself?
I'm Omar.
I'm good.
I I do like tech stuff here on the West Coast in the US. I enjoy reading a lot, and yeah, like Ashia or Meher, as you know her, it has been one of the people
Okay.
who's like shown me a lot of books, like recommended a lot of stuff to me, and I'm really excited to hear more from her about and read and like discuss this book.
Yeah, and I am so grateful to you because, Omar, because you introduced me to Ursula K. Le Guin. And actually, one of the, he actually, so I just wanted to tell my audience that Omar was the first one whom I did the podcast with. And we discussed all four books of the Earthsea series. It was a great discussion. We
Yeah.
discussed all four books, right? It was a great discussion, and at that point I had just kind of was still figuring out the podcast, so I lost the whole recording, like it didn't record. So yeah, but he was the first one, so welcome again basically is what I'm gonna say. um but also, Umar, so you read Western Lane, and you did it in a day. I think yesterday you
Yeah,
started,
yeah,
and
yeah. I
I mean,
basically
it's a
heard it.
short book.
It's like 160 pages. So I did the audiobook this morning. It was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. Yeah.
So how, sorry, I'm just trying to get the volume up. Yeah. So Omar, what did you think about this book? What are your, or let me, before I ask you your opinion, let me just give a brief kind of overview of the book, just so that people are familiar with it before we start our discussion. Um, yeah, I basically wanted to read you the summary of the book. 11-year-old Gopi has been playing squash since she was old enough to hold a racket. When her mother dies, her father enlists her in a quietly brutal training regimen, and the game becomes her world. Slowly, she grows apart from her sisters. Her life is reduced to the sport, guided by its rhythms: the serve, the volley, the drive, the shot, and its echo. Um, so basically, this is a shorter version. But yeah, this book begins with the tragedy of Gopi and her sisters Kush and Mona losing their mother, and then basically trying to cope with it with a father who is not particularly demonstrative or communicative. And then the game of squash kind of helps Gopi in some ways. Uh, but also kind of takes her away from her family a little bit as well. Um, yeah, and this has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and it's the author is Chetna Maroo, and it's her debut novel actually, so which is really amazing for her. Yeah, and their themes are of grief and coping with grief and moving on with life when you've lost somebody very close to you. But it's also a coming of age story for Gopi, who is 11 years old. Actually, the main character is a child. So that's the basic overview. Omar, I wanted to turn it over to you. What did you think of this book?
So uh, I think one thing that becomes clear really early on is that like especially for a debut author, this is a really beautifully written novel. I think the like at times it's like the prose is like it's very subtle in some ways, and sometimes like it's subtle to the point of making the plot not go places, I feel. Uh, and but like what the I think what you take away from the book most is that this writer is super talented. They know how to write a sentence. They know how to structure it in a way that's like it sounds because I did the audiobook, so it's really it was really
Oh, you did
yeah.
the audio.
So
Okay.
so it was an interesting. Which is not something I do very often, uh, but yeah, I just had a credit on Audible and I used it. Uh, so
Yeah.
like, and it sounds really good. Like, the prose like is melodious in some way. Uh, and I think the interactions between her and her sisters are great. Like, especially like some of the latter interactions with Mona. Um, the the closeness with Kush is maintained throughout. With Mona, it's more of a there's more ups and downs in that relationship.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. The relationship with Maqsood I found kind of pretty interesting as well. Yeah. Especially since this is like a Jain family in who are Gujarati, speaking like becoming friends with and becoming close to Pakistani men. Uh, yeah, and I think the like again I have zero or like pretty much any racket sport, but the author really takes you there into the court. You can hear the sound of the racket, the like so if you've done anything in a flow state, essentially, like yeah, you can feel that. Like it doesn't even have to be sporting. As somebody who has no athletic prowess to speak of, so like, but like there are other moments where I've like felt that like everything is going right in this moment. And so I think she would be the top
I'm
of
so
that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you hit the points, actually most of the discussion points that I noted down. So let me just take it from the top. So it's interesting that you pointed out the relationship between the sisters, because I think that's one of the strongest points of the book is how it kind of talks about the complicated relationship between them, and so many things are left unsaid. Um, so yeah, I also thought that I thought the relationship between her and Kush was really touching. Um, and like yeah, I just wanted to read actually a bit about that. Uh, Also to give people an idea of the kind of language in the book. So this is the time when Gopi has a dream, and then she kind of wakes up from it. She's dreaming about her mother and her father on the court or something, and it's not really a very pleasant dream. So she wakes up. Um, Kush's face was close to mine, and her voice was strange, and I realized she was on the verge of crying, and it was because I was crying, not softly to myself, but with deep, swelling sobs, and my shoulders were shuddering, and everything was like water. My hands and cheeks and mouth were wet. Kush held my shoulders, and I just kept crying, with the feeling that it was coming from somewhere big and open inside me. So it's just a like there are several moments like this, like when the conflict between Gopi and Mona is kind of smoothed out by Kush. So I agree with you. Like I thought the relationship between the sisters was an interesting kind of look at how all of them are dealing with grief in different ways. I mean, it also kind of showed, no, how grief is different, how it's handled differently. Like with Gopi, it's like she goes into squash and she kind of wants to distract herself in some ways and just lose herself in the sport. And with Mona, she becomes like this, almost like takes on the role of a mother and caretaker for the family. And you know, and while she's doing that, there's also resentment because she's just a child towards the father. Like she becomes very judgmental of the father. Kush, I feel like the way that I understood her character was that she was just a support system for Gopi, and kind of keeping the balance in the family. Not really that
Yeah,
much more. I didn't get that much
I
more.
agree. I think Kush's character was like even compared to like aunts and uncles. I think like in like some ways she was somewhat underdeveloped. Uh, like I
Yeah.
thought like Pawan and Aunt Ranjan's characters were also like for the brief periods they appeared they've made a pretty significant contribution, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and we will talk about like the what you also said about how it doesn't move the plot along or something to that level. I also had the same kind of reading of this book, but I wanted to also talk just a little bit about what worked before I talk about what didn't, before we go into that. But so yeah, I mean, I also felt that Maru has this tender way of talking about relationships, uh, like between Gopi and her father, like whom she calls Pa. I feel like actually that they were very close, and oftentimes, her father would be feeling something, and she would kind of know what it was. Like it's interesting. Actually, she is a very skilled. She's a really skillful writer because she was able to convey to us not just what what Gopi's father was feeling, but also how Gopi was perceiving his response. So that's pretty. I don't know. I think that's pretty amazing. Like to do that in your writing, and to have these layers. So and they almost like read each other's minds. So that yeah. Um, and then I also like the way that she, like what you said, like what the way that she talked about squash, in the sense that it didn't get too technical, but we know that it was like central to the story. Like it was an important part of it. So she introduces it and she talks about it in a way that it's a very like organic part of the story. It's not like it doesn't stand out like, you know. So it's woven in very well. I felt. And yeah, so I mean, I thought that yeah, it helped Gopi focus. It helped her deal with grief, and I wanted to actually ask you, like you just talked about the flow state. That was actually one of my questions for you. Was like, well, I was gonna ask you if you've played any sports, but also like yeah, just been engaged in something that you love. So like in a flow state that that has helped you in difficult times. Like, what has that experience been?
Yeah, like so my experiences like are going to be somewhat boring, at least because they're like mostly academic. Especially like grad school
Mm.
was like that sometimes. Like when just uh, sometimes we would get these really difficult math heavy assignments, and you know, yeah, someone who didn't have the best undergrad education, I would start out very confused, and then I'd like I would just start thinking about those. Like it'd take like 3 days to just think about the problems rather than just sitting down with them. And once I felt like I had a grasp of them, I would sit down, like just start writing. And yeah, like suddenly like 4 or 5 hours would have passed, and I wouldn't have like really realized it. And it's like I'm done. And that felt pretty amazing. It's pretty rare for me because like again, like for me like flow state is usually like for a lot of people it's like creating stuff. For me, it's often with reading. It's very consumptive. That I so it's not really like it doesn't represent Gopi's experience very well. But I think like some moments in like work or academics like that's really what has yeah. And I think like the subtlety of the novel is like there's some places that it really works. Like I think where this 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 talk of how tenderly and how naturally she speaks of squash throughout. Her relationship with her father is like I think a place where the subtlety is enough. Like you don't need it any more of it, any more explicit characterization to move that portion of the plot along. Like uh, I felt like that was superbly written. Her like when she was speaking about these players, uh, that was also some Jahan
Jahangir Khan.
Khan, Gogi Alauddin, like how she would describe their styles like as somebody who's like who follows like a lot of soccer and a bit of F1. I found those things like very reminiscent of how we talk about like some greats in those sports.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting to get that history of squash and how a British Pakistani man, I think, defeated a Britisher. That was a very happy, I felt very good reading about that. But I wanted to go back to what you said, Omar, like how reading for you is like that kind of an experience where you completely are immersed and you're not aware of time. When we first recorded our podcast, the first podcast, we actually talked about reading, and I asked you, so I want to ask you this question again. But what has been your relationship with books and with reading? And I remember asking you this in the context of you growing up in Aligarh. So you want to just talk a little bit about that, like about the books that you're reading, basically your relationship with reading and
Yeah,
books.
of course. Um, yeah, like so this starts like out in Saudi Arabia essentially. Like I remember like my mom used to like they wanted us to read because like it was the right thing to do, I guess. Uh, and they got me a few books, just random Enid Blyton stories, and like uh, not even the series and stuff, not the Secret Seven or the Famous Five, not those books. She also had like collections of short stories that I bought a few of those. I got really into them, and then I got those Secret Seven, Famous Five books. And so we used to come to India every year for a vacation, every summer, and so that's the only times of the year that I used to see my dad. And the first thing we would do, because Aligarh didn't really have any bookstores, so we landed in Delhi. And but before we got to Aligarh, we would stop at like this bookstore in South Extension called the Bookmark. Um, we'd stop there, and that was, I remember like being allowed to go crazy. Like I could pick up like whatever I wanted, how much ever I wanted, and I would rarely, if ever, get told no, which is such a liberating and like a joyous experience. And that's led to that's like essentially how I remember reading growing up, and I started borrowing a few books, like a few books in fantasy, which have become like my genre of choice recently. And yeah, it just snowballed from there. And yeah, I currently also have the same problem as I used to back in India, like just like hoarding, buying, going to a bookshop every week. Uh, yeah, and the yeah, I feel like it's essentially like a calming experience, a spiritual experience, an escape in many ways. Like especially in school, not the most popular of children. Uh, it was just like a way to get away and to make friends with librarians, so they would uh, let me check out books when it wasn't our turn to check out books, essentially. Uh, yeah, so that's kind of my story.
Yeah. What could you speak up a little bit because I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, let me come
Like
closer as well.
maybe you're,
Is this a little better?
yeah, a little better. But now your
Yeah, let
face
me
is
fix
like
that
a
as
little
well.
bit out of focus.
I hope this is reasonable on both fronts.
Yeah, थोड़ा सा पीछे चले जाओ और पीछे.
Is this good?
हाँ, अब सही है. Yeah, because we have to,
Yeah,
it's aesthetic.
yeah, I'm sure.
No, but I agree with you, like about books, man. Like, for me, like my mother still has that book with her, but I was gifted, I think, by her or I don't know, by Grimm's Fairy Tales. I think I told you about this. That was like one of the first. I remember that was one of the first books that I read, and I think that's where my passion for fairy tales has just kind of continued. Like and yeah, I agree with you. Like books have saved us, and it becomes and such an important part of growing up, and also even like having a relationship with a parent. The like just I don't know. Like I feel like they help. They're such an important part of our childhood memories for many people. Just the event of going and buying books or reading books with a parent, it becomes yeah, it just becomes an unforgettable memory from one's past. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like for me, it's reading and writing. Like when I get into it, and then I forget. But it to arrive at that place is also very, very hard with everything that's happening in one's life, I think. I don't know. But yeah, let's get into what didn't work for us in this book, which um, so I agree. I feel like there were so many times when things were left unsaid, where they needed to be explained. I felt like the book compromised on substance um, for the sake of, I don't know, sounding spare, you know. Uh, but it was too much. Like I wanted something more. Like I wanted something added. So just wanted to give an example actually, where I was like, why did this happen? Like, um, um, yeah. So this is actually when they meet Maqsood, and as you said, they're Jains, and Maqsood is a Pakistani, a Muslim. And so, yeah, so I mean, over time they become friends, but when they initially meet, this is what happens. This man's name was Maqsood. When Maqsood first came to Western Lane, he and Pa had been wary of one another. It was Maqsood who had made the first move. In the bar, Maqsood had offered Pa a drink, and before he accepted, Pa had talked a little. It seemed to be about nothing, but somehow in this nothing, Pa made it known to Maqsood that he gestured with his hand to indicate that he meant himself and us, were Jains. At home, Mona tried to make an argument of it. If we are all brothers, why does it matter that we are Jains? She demanded. It matters, Pa said, and went back to his paperwork. So I don't know. Like I was just like, why? Like why does it matter? Like I expected kind of somewhat of a response, but there's nothing, you know. And another instance is when like yeah so this is again with Pa, and she's Gopi's playing with her father. Um, and it says, holding the racket so that its face was open, Pa adjusted his grip. He frowned slightly, adjusted again. The radio buzzed on, and slowly we understood that we had made a terrible mistake in going to London, in spending Mona's money. Um, and it's like sometimes things are just not spoken about, and while it's admirable that she does it in a way that we are able to follow the story, I really sometimes wish that she would go a little deeper, you know, like go a little deeper with what the characters are feeling and thinking. Like I really wanted to know, you know. And so that's why I felt like she didn't actually know her characters. That's what I felt. Like like why they're doing the things that they're doing, I couldn't get an explanation from it, and I could see that she wasn't able to give it to us and wasn't able to explain it fully. So that left me like kind of frustrated reading this book. And yeah, I just didn't think that it worked hard enough. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like when you see a book, yeah, when you see a book and it's like, you know, like they've gotten history and you know, dialogue and really like a journey for a character. Didn't feel that with this one. I just felt like it was very on the surface. Didn't really even the concept of grief, like it was hinted at, but at some point I wanted it to go inside and really kind of reflect on it. And yeah, I just didn't think the writer worked hard enough for this book. I don't know, I'm sorry. Like it just felt that way, especially because I've been reading some of the other ones. um so yeah, I mean, and most of what I think is happening inside the mind of the characters, I felt was just my conjecture. I couldn't really confirm. The book didn't confirm. So what do you think? Do you agree, disagree, kind of?
Yeah, that thread, like especially the one about the racket being a terrible mistake, that annoyed me so much because I didn't get any resolution for that. That was like, yeah, that was,
Resolutions are right.
yeah, like why? Like I guess like if she had lost the tournament with that racket, something would have come out of it or something like, you know, something bad happens that is explicitly related to that racket. At least you can see. She doesn't have to tell us right away, but like tell us at some point, right? And yeah, I found that really lacking. And you know, this entire upheaval of her moving and all of that, it was like, yeah, it happened kind of situation. Like it should be a bigger deal for an 11-year-old. Um, and
Yeah.
I think the logic around that was like not the best as well.
Mhm.
Like, I understand it. Maybe I'm just not exposed to that sort of environment. But like the fact that like, you know, her mother die means that like, you know, taking one child to live with the aunt and uncle is like a reasonable possibility. Like maybe it's just like pure ignorance on my end, but I don't know if like this is like either the father is not able to take care of them and all three need to go somewhere, or none of them do. I I can see that there might be an argument for middle ground, but the author does not make it.
Yeah. 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 I just didn't feel this book very deeply. That's the thing that I came away with is, and I honestly, I mean, maybe it sounds really, really harsh, but I actually don't even know why it was shortlisted. I don't know. I mean, I read this other one with Janet Rodriguez. It was called what was it called? I forgot now. This Other Eden. It's also been shortlisted, and yeah, this is not. And now I'm reading Pearl, which is one that was longlisted and it didn't make it to the shortlist. But I mean, it's got a lot more depth to it than this one, and I feel like it's a very like. I feel also it's like a typically modern British novel. Like it just stays in a very like it doesn't spill over. There's no messiness. It's a very like this is this. And I don't know. I mean, I did like. I mean, what we said, like we liked all those things, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes absolute sense that this is a first novel. I think like there are things here that will like it just needs a little more. This book specifically, I think it needed like another 100 pages to do some stuff with.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just like you take the best parts of this book and you write based on that. I felt also like very often there was just like beauty for beauty's sake, like which annoys me sometimes. Like like while I thought that the squash was very well explained throughout,
Yeah.
I there's only so many times that the sound of a ball hitting something is going to carry some sort of weight within me, right? Like the first time it's interesting, the second time it carries some weight, but like the third and the fourth and the fifth, I'm just like, okay, like there's a ball, it hits hard, like, and it makes
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
no longer carries the
Yeah. I
annoyance.
think I think you're yeah, I think you're right about it being a first novel. So I think that definitely has to be taken into consideration. And we don't know how much the original book was, how many pages it was. Maybe it was longer, and I don't know, maybe the editors cut it down to make it very, very basic. We don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think for a first novel, it is very well written
Yeah.
and all of that. So, but yeah, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things that I thought were nice. Like to not end on a note. I thought like
Thank you,
the
because I'm like
yeah,
I said everything.
I thought the subtlety of her friend's mother and her father's relationship was quiet and
Oh yeah, Ged's mother. Yeah.
yeah, and the like the one moment where like which was visceral and made me feel something was the moment when she hit her dad with a ball, like accidentally on purpose, essentially, right?
Yeah.
That I thought was really well done. The description of like the yellowish, greenish. Again, it happened too many times, but the first time she said that was really nice.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I
Yeah.
yeah.
I was. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that yeah, I was really happy that something happened. So, and but again, like because I didn't know why she did it. I didn't know why she did it. I was like, you're hitting your dad, and I understand it's grief and he's pushing you and all that, but again, I needed more. But what I also, because you reminded me of that, is like what one thing that really kind of was I would say somewhat of a visceral moment was when Ged's mother refused, like denied her playing Ged. I thought that was so
Yeah,
cruel.
especially the second time, right, when
Like
she was leaving.
she kept on saying no. Like first time, then she asked, apologized sincerely, and then she asked, "Can I please play with Ged?" And she knew how much it meant to her, but she kept on saying no. And I thought that was so
Yeah,
cruel. But again, it didn't go anywhere. Like you know what I mean? Like so yeah. Again, I wanted something built on that. But I thought that was really cruel.
yeah, I agree. I just
How
thought,
can you do that to
but,
an
but, but why would
11-year-old
you do that?
child?
Like, you're the adult, she's a child. Is like,
Yeah.
and
But also
yeah,
like the father doesn't really stand up for his daughter. Like you know what I mean? Like he still
yeah,
hangs out with
yeah,
Ged's.
yeah. Like, I conjectured that like she hit her father because he was hanging out with Ged's mother. Like, but yeah,
Oh,
like that never.
I didn't think that. I thought that she hit her father because he was pushing her too hard and like, you know, just like making it really difficult for her to enjoy squash. So again, we don't know.
Yeah, like my conjecture is based on like that moment where she asks her father, "Do you remember, Ma?" And like, but I agree that it is a little far-fetched.
No, wait, can you tell
Uh,
me what? No, can you talk about that? What when she asks the father if he misses Ma.
if he remembers Ma when he's looking at the chair in the living room,
Oh, oh, okay,
and
yeah,
that
yeah.
like the entire time he's hanging out with this other woman. So like yeah, that's
But
just
again,
sort
he
of the
doesn't say
yeah,
anything. He just stares at the chair. He doesn't say like the
yeah,
characters are not speaking. Like they're not saying what they're feeling, and maybe that's actually a very typical British thing, I think. So
yeah. It's a typical British thing, and like I felt like in some ways, like I think like the dad not being very expressive, like from an Indian father's context, I can see that. Like
yeah,
yeah,
well, I can see also. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Like typical, like keeping your feelings bottled in until they implode, until you implode. Like that would have been actually a really good thing I would have liked to read, like the father just imploding, but it didn't. Anything else you want to add, Omar?
yeah. One other moment that was pretty cool, I thought was like like, and it again, like I was disappointed that it didn't go anywhere. Was like Kush and Mona fighting at the fair, and I was like, oh, this might be cool, and then it just like kind of
Then they stop.
then they stop and they start hanging out again, and there's no scolding, nobody yells at them. It's just like, I'm like, where is the yelling? You are Indian parents. There is another Pakistani man in there as well. Somebody yell like somebody.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like there was a lot of grief. Like there was a lot of quiet grief. Um, but yeah, you know, people have loved this novel, I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's been nominated, so I mean, there's something, but like, yeah, for it to have held me, I needed something deeper, and it didn't provide that. But you know, I think it's a really great effort for a first time writer, and I think it's an amazing honor that she's been nominated for the Booker. And yeah, I mean the end match, which we shouldn't talk about, like whatever, like actually, but like the squash, like the game was very interesting. Like that was something that popped. I felt like that was actually something that did go somewhere, and something did happen and all of that. So yeah. So should we? Do you want to add something, or should we end our session? Our
No,
session,
I think that's it.
our
Yeah, no,
podcast.
I think that's it. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
lovely talking to you again, Ashiapi. Yeah, hopefully
Thank
we
you,
can do
Omar.
it
The
again
book
sometime.
is Western Lane. This is a cover. I think the cover is beautiful, actually. But yeah, thank you, Omar. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for reading this book.
Anytime, Ashiapi. Like, lovely talking to
Okay,
you.
thank
Bye.
you.